and McKay for presentations so far. Really fascinating and really engaging stuff. So my name is David McKay. I am Head of Policy at Soil Association for Scotland in terms of my day job, but this evening I've got a slightly different hat on because my wife and I also operate a small-scale fruit and veg growing enterprise from our home in Aberdeenshire. So that's going to be my focus this evening, and hopefully just give you an idea of, I guess, the journey that we've been on over the past few years, the experiences that we've had with it, and talk a little bit about our thinking behind doing what we are doing, which was really born of a desire to grow more of the food that we eat as a family, and be a little bit more self-sufficient. And also that, sorry, excuse me, my son just walked into the room. Yes, okay, thanks. Okay, so a lot to us. We moved to a property near King Edward in Aberdeenshire in 2017. If you don't know where that is, it's located between Banff and Turriff. And as you can see from the photograph there, we planted quite a lot of trees after we moved here. It was the year after we started doing that in a deal with Woodland Trust. And this was with a view to, we'd acquired this, it's a relatively small property in agricultural terms, and it's not a farm, but there was an opportunity there, we felt, to do a little bit to restore nature, do a bit for biodiversity and habitat restoration as well. So we planted a range of native trees. In the top section of the property there, the picture that you can see, we planted oak, silver birch and gean, wild cherry. There's a gully that runs through. You can see where the gorse bushes are on the far field, and it's a lot more boggy in that area. So we planted goat willow, grey willow and alder. And then closer to the road, we planted hedges of hawthorn, blackthorn and hazel. In addition to that, we've got an area which is about an acre in size, where we are doing the bulk of our fruit and veg growing. And the idea behind that was, as I said earlier, to really try and grow more of our own food. We've been doing that for a while anyway. In our previous home, we were keen gardeners, and I grew vegetables, but we wanted to try and do it on a slightly larger scale and see how we got on. So in terms of getting organised with this project a few years ago, the first thing we thought about, and I think anyone should really think about, is location. And location in a couple of different ways. One, in terms of where you are in relation to where the people are. So as I mentioned earlier, we're between the towns of Turriff and Banff. Turriff's got a population of about 5,000, Banff has a population of about 4,000, and there are numerous villages within a kind of 10-mile radius. So we felt certainly there would be no shortage of potential customers for what we were trying to do. The second thing that we looked at was around logistics. So things like, do we have a fresh water supply where we're going to be locating our veg plots? The nearest one was about 200 meters away. So when we first started, we were using water butts to try and get around that, so we didn't have to make too many journeys back and forth. And the other issue we had was with fencing. So as you can see from the picture there, down in the gully, it's kind of a wild area. So we have a lot of deer that will come in about, there's rabbits, there are foxes, so all sorts of potential problems there if you're growing crops in a field like one you see in the picture there. So we erected some fencing and were able to largely mitigate those problems. So that's an ongoing challenge. One of the best pieces of advice we had early on in this process, and we've read tons of books and been online to look at various different ways that people went about this, was to start small. And the temptation when you have a field of, I think it was about an acre and a half, is to plough the whole thing up and try and go to scale from quite an early stage. But instead of doing that, I started with 3 small plots, each one about 30 square meters, and haven't really grown a huge amount since then. We've now got 5, which we operate in a rotation, so 5 30 square meter plots. In addition to that, we have a fenced off garden area closer to the house, where we now have our polytunnel and some other perennial veg growing there. And that kind of brings me on to the next question, which was what to grow. And I guess there's been an element of trial and error to that for us, and learning what we can grow here. And I guess to some degree I've been pleasantly surprised with that. We're now running a rotation where we have one bed with brassicas, so kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, another with squash, so winter squash, summer squash, courgettes. Then we have a bed with roots, so carrots, parsnips, beetroot, we'll grow tates, peas, beans. And as I'll get to in a moment, we've also got a polytunnel where we can grow a lot of things that we couldn't grow outside. So that really was a game changer for us. When we got a self-built polytunnel, it was 2 years ago now in the summertime. And you can see me looking very pleased with myself after the initial construction process was completed. And what this has done is it's given us the opportunity to extend the growing season. So there are a lot of things that we can grow in the polytunnel that we wouldn't be able to grow outside very well, such as tomatoes, cucumbers, chilies, sweet corn we also grow in there. But almost more importantly, I would suggest it's allowed us to continue growing through the winter. So we grow winter greens, spinach, all different varieties of lettuce, and we were delighted to be able to continue cropping those winter greens right through Christmas and New Year into the early part of the year. So that's made a massive difference to what we thought we'd be able to do here. I also want to touch upon quickly the importance of composting and the use of manures. So composting, first of all, was something that is an ongoing challenge, but one that I really enjoy. And I guess with many things in life, it's about balance, and it's about getting the right mix of materials in there. But we've always thought from the outset that the more we can recycle plant residues, grass clippings, and using cardboard, etc., the better. It prevents us from bringing too much into the plots in terms of inputs from elsewhere. One which we do introduce and have done this year has been some farmyard manure from a neighbour. So we made a decision a couple of years ago to go organic, and we've been working through that process. In fact, we should be fully certified this month in time for this summer. And that was a personal decision. It's not for everybody, but it's one that we really felt was important for us in terms of how we wanted our food to be grown. But we are allowed within the organic standards to bring in farmyard manure, provided it hasn't been, the animals haven't been fed GMOs, basically. So we've done that, and it's a great source of fertility for us, for the beds, to keep the veg flourishing each year. We've had a challenge in terms of how to deal with pests, like any gardener would attest to. We've run into issues with aphids one year on our aubergines, and we've had problems with slugs, which, because we're organic, is quite difficult to deal with. And an example of some plant diseases, we had powdery mildew on our squash one year when they were inside the polytunnel. I now grow them outside, and I find that is a much better option. So I want to talk briefly about the opportunities that this has afforded us. So we kind of went into it at the outset, as I say, trying to start very small and build up. And what I discovered very quickly was that social media can be a very powerful tool. So we were tracking our progress with our growing on Instagram. And very quickly, we were getting contacted by people asking if we would sell our produce. So, for example, some zero waste shops got in touch, and people who lived close to us but didn't realize that we were doing this. So very quickly we were able to start selling locally. And one of the things from the very first picture that I showed in the introductory slide, we're running veg boxes through the summer to our neighbours. And I guess that brings me on to the other point around seasonality and availability of produce. I mean, that's, I guess, both an opportunity and a challenge. It's a challenge in terms, for us as, starting out, it was a challenge to satisfy demand. So people perhaps didn't understand that you weren't going to produce everything all year round, and getting that message across that there are certain things at certain times of year that will be provided and other times of year that you won't get. And it's been interesting as we've gone on that, some of the things that people expect to eat, I guess, as a result of what they're used to seeing in the supermarket, and comparing that with what we actually produce in Scotland. So, for example, we have blackcurrant and gooseberry bushes. Now, people don't really buy that, but it's something we're looking to get into. So far, we've used the blackcurrant and gooseberry to make jam. We also made blackcurrant cordial from it. So it's an interesting one. Our kids are desperately keen on fruit. They'll eat any fruit that we put in front of them, but they prefer blueberries to our blackcurrants, I guess, because they're sweeter. So I think there's something in there about educating people a wee bit, and perhaps trying to nudge people back towards eating what is seasonal and local here in Scotland. And the last point here before I move from the next slide was just about the labour, because as with any kind of market garden operation, it is very labour intensive, and I work full time, so that has been a challenge in terms of finding the time to do it. As much as I love being out in the plots, and I'm never happier than I am when I'm doing that, it can be a challenge. And if we were to upscale, then we would look to be bringing in some seasonal staff. I want to talk a little bit about resilience. This is something that I think Nikki touched upon as well in our presentation. You will all remember Storm Arwen towards the end of next year. These photographs show you the impact this had on us here in King Edward. Just over 2 years after I built it, the polytunnel was left looking pretty horrendous, and it was really devastating for that to happen. But I know from looking at what happened elsewhere that there's many others were far worse hit than we were during that storm, and many other terrible things happened. But what it forced us to do was to adapt, to think again, and to replan what we were doing. And in very practical terms, that meant relocating the polytunnel to an area that had some more shelter, which we've done now, and rebuilt that. Despite how bad it looks in that picture, actually we were able to salvage most of it. So we've gone from having a 30-foot long polytunnel to a 20-foot polytunnel, but we've still managed to retain most of it. And I think the other element of resilience also is about what we actually grow here and how we're going to plan for the future, because we know that these types of extreme weather events are become more and more frequent, and I do think we do need to address what we're actually producing in Scotland. So, for example, in our arable land, about 80% of that crops either goes for whisky production or for animal feed. And I think that we need to be making more of a shift in future to be growing more vegetables, more fruit, and more pulses here in Scotland. Now, that's not going to happen by itself. That will require incentives, it will require policy change by government, but I think that very much is the direction in which we should be going. So in terms of the policy, I'll maybe put my Soil Association hat on briefly to discuss this. What we've been doing here in Aberdeenshire, actually, it folds in many ways to emerging policy at Scottish Government level. You will all, I'm sure, have heard of the Good Food Nation Bill. There was actually a debate today, the stage 1 debate in the Scottish Parliament, where MSPs were discussing the first stage in the bill's progress, which has gone through the initial committee stage before moving to stage 2. The Good Food Nation is setting a very, I guess, overarching ambition for Scotland that everyone should have access to the healthy and nutritious food that they need. The bill provides a framework for which a national food plan will be produced. And from that, there will also need to be local food plans from individual councils and health boards. There's also a local food strategy that is coming from Scottish Government. There was a consultation towards the end of last year. And in the consultation document from Scottish Government, they talked about the enormous potential for local production to enrich lives, improve diets, reduce food miles, and keep value in communities. So there's been some work on this already. Some of you may be aware of the Community Empowerment Act of 2015 that actually required each council area to prepare a food growing strategy for its own area, and also to identify land that could be used for allotment sites, or to identify other areas of land that could be used for community growing. So this stuff's been around for a long time, but I think we're not just quite joining the dots yet. And I do think there's still a fair bit of work to be done with the Good Food Nation bill, the local food strategy, and also how those relate to the agriculture bill, which will be coming next year. And I guess there's a question mark in terms of what that future policy support will look like, and we will find out soon enough. And what we don't know is how that is going to apply to small scale growers. So at the moment, if you're under 3 hectares, you're not eligible for any kind of government support. It'll be interesting to see, as things move on, what mechanisms the government wants to put in place to try and encourage more of that small scale growing that is highlighted in the local food strategy. So some final thoughts. I think in terms of sort of practical points or suggestions for those listening today, I would encourage everybody, if you're not already doing so, to try growing your own. There's a great quote I saw online the other day. It's not mine, but it is very pertinent to what we're talking about at the moment. It's start from where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I think that is great advice to anyone who's thinking about growing some of their own food. And it really doesn't matter where you live. You know, if you're in a block of flats, you can be growing herbs on your windowsill. If you have a small garden, why not this year try planting some tatties to get you started? And believe me, if you get bitten by the bug, you will be very keen to push on and try and see what else you can grow. And as I've indicated earlier, there are many vegetables that you can grow outdoors in Scotland, and it's relatively easy to do so. We have made, over the past few years, I'm sure, plenty of mistakes, and we've learned from all of them. And I think often that's the best way to learn. And I think, attending events like this or talking to other people, there's a wealth of information out there. You can go online. There's an unbelievable amount of help you can find on YouTube alone. There are numerous books. I've got a whole shelf full of books that I bought on this topic, local growing, organic growing, and the information is there. It's out there to find and to digest. And I would encourage any of you and all of you to take some time, do your own thing, see if you can grow some more of your own food. I think that we should all be trying to do that. But I'll stop there and hand back to Adam, because I think that's us at about 8 o'clock.